everybody, today we'll talk about one of my favorite tools, which is Argo CD. We'll talk about what to do, what not to do, what are the best practices that you can follow to prevent misconfiguration in your production. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Noah Barkey. I'm a developer advocate at The3, and I'm here today to share with you the best practices that I discovered when I first learned about Argo CD. And the reason why I love Argo CD so much is because Argo CD is pure GitOps. And I truly believe in GitOps. I believe that every Kubernetes resource should be dealt exactly the same as your source code. And Argo CD makes it perfectly easy by being implemented as an extension to your Kubernetes cluster. And I'm sure that you all know that Argo CD is only one of 4 amazing open source projects. We also have Argo workflows, Argo rollouts, Argo events. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about best practices for Argo CD, Argo workflows, and Argo rollouts. We'll talk about 6 of the best practices, but you can follow the full list in our The3 documentation, and stay tuned because we're adding more and more every day. The first best practice would be to make sure that all Argo CD resources are using the Argo CD namespace. The reason why is actually dependent on how you installed Argo CD in the first place. Because if you use the typical deployment of Argo CD, then under the hood, Argo CD creates a cluster role and cluster role bindings that reference by default to the Argo CD namespace. So if you use a different namespace, you gotta make sure that you reconfigure all the internals component of Argo CD, and it might get too messy if you ask me. So make sure that you use the Argo CD namespace in all Argo CD resources. The next best practice is very important, especially when we want to change a little bit Argo CD behavior. For instance, if we want to use Helm or Customize. In these use cases, we often want to change some of Argo CD internal components, such as config maps. And if we do so, we must ensure that we label our config maps with part of Argo CD, because otherwise Argo CD won't be able to use them. You won't see any error. You will simply grab your head and won't understand why this is not working. Trust me, I've been there. So make sure that if you use one of the config maps, one of the internal components of Argo CD config maps, label them part of Argo CD. This best practice is to make sure that all rollouts that are marked as deprecated will also scale down their old replica sets. You see, the thing is that every rollout by default has 10 minutes to make a progress during an update. If it fails to do so, then the rollout will be considered as failed. If by any reason one of the pods gets stuck in an error state, for instance, it will back off, then the rollout will be deprecated, but the bad pods, the bad replica sets, it won't be scaled down, and therefore it will keep retrying. To avoid this, you need to abort the rollout, and to make sure that you can do so, you need to set progress deadline abort to true. This best practice, this one is actually one of my favorites because it's crucial, but it's very easy to understand. You see, the thing is, if we set the retry strategy to empty in workflow, we actually tell the container to continue retrying until completion, which can easily cause an out-of-memory issues. So pay attention, never set the retry strategy to empty. But on that subject, and this is actually the best practice that I love the most, would be to make sure that we retry our workflow only when we want to. You see, other than the retry strategy, we can also set a retry policy, which indicates which kind of errors we want to retry our job. We have 3 options. We can set it to always, we can set it on error, and we can set it on transient. What's the catch, you probably ask? This is a good question. The catch is that if we set it to always, it's simply too much. We certainly don't want to retry our job if we have a bug in our source code. However, if we set it to on error, it's not enough. Because on with graceful pod termination, the kubelet assigned failure status with a shutdown reason. So as a result, node preemptions will result with a failure status and not error, and therefore they will not be retried. So what do we do? Apparently, we can also use an expression with the retry policy. So I say, let's use both. Let's set the retry policy to always and the expression and use the expression to filter only the error status that we care about. And as you can see in the example, we managed to ignore all system levels that are related to the source code, but still to be able to retry the job whenever something gets wrong. This best practice is for Argo rollouts and specifically to make sure that every pause step has a duration, because otherwise we're taking the chance that the rollout will wait for us forever. Let me explain. For every rollout, we can configure a list of steps. Each step can be a pause step, which literally instructs the rollout to pause before it continues to the next step. Now, under the hood, Argo controller uses these steps to manipulate the replica sets of the controller of the rollout. Now, under the hood, when Argo controller reaches a pause step, it adds to the rollout an internal pause condition. If that pause step has configured the duration, then the rollout waits the amount of the duration time, and then the pause condition is removed and the rollout moves forward to the next step. However, if the pause set hasn't configured any duration, then the rollout will wait indefinitely until the pause condition will be removed. This is why my personal advice to you and this best practice is for you to always make sure that you set the maximum duration time for every pause step, so no rollout will wait for you forever. So as I said, guys, these are some of the best practices that I discovered when I first learned about Argo CD, and I highly recommend everybody to use those best practices, follow them, and make sure that misconfiguration won't happen to you. If you want to learn more about how you can enforce those best practices using the Tree open source CLI, then click on this button to see my next video about how to use the Tree with Argo CD to prevent misconfiguration. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Bye-bye.